think we're in a very exciting time to be alive, culturally. But if you want change, you have to be comfortable that there's no blueprint.
In this episode, we sat down with David Fishbein and Joey Miller, who are founders of the Runyon Group. Runyon is a culturally curious real estate group based in Los Angeles, and they have created some projects across the globe that are innovative, forward-thinking, and rooted in design. Having a more intimate conversation with both of these gentlemen really shows that they have been super thoughtful and intentional in how you create something timeless and also bring social relevance to the forefront. These men are innovators and also phenomenal executors. Let's get into it. My girls, my guys, my group. This is MG Method, the show. How did you both meet?
The origin story. A friend introduced us, and she had a wonderful line. She says, to me, she says, I know you have an interesting vision, and I know someone who can actually maybe help you realize it. And to David, she said, I met someone, and he's got big ideas and no ability to actually do it. And so she set us up at a breakfast.
It's like essentially a blind date.
I think I was 25 or 26, and you were probably 23, 24, if I got the numbers right. And from that moment, she was exactly right. I had, at that young age, an idea of something that I wanted to create in my head. I think David, at that point, had the skills to actually do it and had the same vision in his head. And it really took the two of us together to be able to actually make it happen. And I think it's a good sort of parable for how we've built the company and what we're still doing today, which is the combination of, two people, two sets of skills, art, meets business, but I think that's a good lesson, that it takes sort of two personalities, two skill sets to do what we do ultimately. So the origin story is a good story, I think.
Yeah, and it was funny because when we first met, we had no idea that we were going to get into business together. It was just almost kind of the first year. I had just moved to Los Angeles. I had only been there for 6 months and was trying to forge a career in commercial brokerage. And I had really developed this in a very short period of a year and a half prior of graduating college, working with interesting, designers and brands on kind of their expansion, and, really had no kind of idea of, development and what it was like to build a property. And, he had this kind of whole other background of construction and development, and together again, we kind of were able to kind of put together this unique vision with our different skill sets.
But it was one breakfast, that's the truth.
One.
Started at one breakfast.
On from there.
How do you think that people start to become aware, to realize, by removing their ego, I need support with this other thing? How do you guys balance doing that and recognizing I could use that support and he has something that maybe would benefit a greater group if I could acknowledge that?
I think we were pretty different in that. Joey was when we first met, was always I will never have a business partner. I can do everything on my own, etc. And I was always I want a business partner. I need to find someone to work with, and never wanted to be solo. So it was interesting because for the first year and a half or so that we knew each other, we weren't actually business partners. We were working very closely together, but I was kind of dabbling, trying to get into these other business partnerships, and looking for really somebody to help me build what I wanted to do in Los Angeles. And I think after a year and a half working together, he sat me down for lunch, and he's like, what are you doing? He's like, why don't we just partner up? And I was like, you've literally been telling me for the last year and a half you don't want a business partner.
Well, I remember it different. It was almost a capitulation. I said, you're, because we were doing business together at the time. When we first met, each of our companies, me and him, our one-person companies, we were doing business together. And he would always come and he'd say, I'm talking to this person and maybe we're going to partner up, and this person. And I knew these people. I said, this is the worst idea I've ever heard. These people are terrible. So finally, I think we were in New York, and I said, we were going to call on a bunch of different companies to come be part of the place that we're sitting now, I just said, look, I give up. I said, you can't keep talking to these people. I said, you want a partner? I'll be your partner. We'll figure it out. Not knowing that, frankly, I didn't think that I had much to offer in the things that David wanted to pursue, which was mostly helping these companies expand. I thought, well, I know about construction, I know about development, but I would call it, there's strategic laziness rather than the surrendering of ego. Knowing, it's funny, I have 2 very successful relationships. I've been with my wife, I'm 38, we were 14 when we met. So that's a long time. And David and I had a very successful business partnership for many, many years. And it's about, knowing where you might be good and being okay with not doing everything. So I suppose it could be a surrendering of ego. I like to look at it, like I said, as a strategic laziness. Like, why on earth, and I'll tell you what's at the basis of all of it, is trust and respect. In both relationships that I described, is understanding that the thing that the next person is doing is as important or more important or whatever than the things that you're doing. So that sort of respect of what they're doing and what they're contributing. And then the trust, knowing that they're going to conduct themselves in the way that you would or better than you would is important,
Yeah.
And David would argue that sometimes it doesn't get done the way that he would want it done, but it's the person's way.
Yeah, and I think that what's nice is that we've always been 50-50 in everything. And as business evolves, when you're in business for 12 years, like we have, like there's certain times where one person's maybe contributing more to the bottom line than the other, or we're doing more on one project than the other. But there's this common knowledge and trust, as they said, that like we're all working towards a real goal and growth together, and that it isn't about like tit for tat and like who's doing more at one time, but that together we're really building something. And I think we've been always really great that like it's never been again getting that ego involved where like, oh, like this is my project or this is your project, but like really working together and building each other up where like one of us might be weaker than the other. And so it's really been an incredible relationship that, I sometimes just like am shocked when I look back at like what we've done like in a short period of time and just go like, wow, this is crazy.
But I think it also springs from confidence, right? Like,
yeah.
I think that a lot of times people have bad reactions because they don't feel confident in themselves, right? Like this is in any relationship, someone could say, man, I don't know what that person's up to. Are they trying to, I don't feel good, right? But if you're just there and doing your thing and always marching towards that common goal, I think that comes. It's probably confidence builds, right, into trust, and then obviously respect of each other's contributions.
Yeah.
And knowing that we're going toward, I suppose, knowing that you're going towards the same place, a shared common vision.
I think we're both like insanely curious. Like we're just like always like reading and like, traveling and like going to the new interesting restaurant or interesting gallery or store. And like, we both have this like incredible passion for discovery and uncovering things and, not just like sitting easy and being like, okay, we're successful. Like we can just like lay back and like do whatever we want now. Like there's this constant drive and hunger to continue to innovate and to continue to uncover and find other entrepreneurs as well that are doing things that inspire us. And so I think for us, like our business is if you look at like our past trajectory of 12 years from, being in brokerage, having platform as a development, and now being retailers where we have these stores, like it's just, they might seem like kind of all like different segments, but like really they're all truly driven by like things that we're interested in and not necessarily things that we had backgrounds in. And I think there's again this confidence that like just because we're not experts in something, so to speak, like we literally had no experience in retail. We'd never worked in a store. We had never bought from a store.
I worked in a store.
Oh, he was in
Abercrombie and
Fitch right there.
15 years old.
But again, there's this again confidence that like just because a path is uncharted for us, that doesn't mean that we won't be really great at it. It just takes a lot of hard work and failure. It takes making mistakes over and over again to learn how to do something. And I think that we're not afraid to get our hands dirty, but also to like fail and be like, okay, that was a mess up, but like, how do we correct it?
Was there a specific moment in which you guys like realize that the world doesn't have to look the way that it does? You know, like what for you, what was each of those moments, if you had one that was like a defining moment of like, no, this is going to be done very differently, and I'm okay with that.
Defining moment of like just in general of like business,
or yeah, specifically like what you guys have built here. You know, it's very non-conventional compared to the way that the sphere of LA looked. So you at some point realized like, I'm going to do this really differently, and maybe people weren't supportive of that initially.
Yeah,
to say the least.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that for us, like, there was like kind of this underlying belief that if we, you know, as again, people interested in design and great food and fashion, felt like there was a place that was missing, or that there was a spot in Los Angeles that didn't exist, that there would be other people that would like love like the types of things that we were interested in. So it was like maybe a little bit of like arrogance, or like, you know, just like, hey, like we can't be like the only ones that like are craving this destination. And I think that with here in Culver City, like it was just, it was certainly pioneering when we bought this property. Like this was not a part of town where like people were like coming for interesting stores or restaurants. And certainly like when we told people that we were doing this, they're like, this is not a great idea. Like, you know, you should probably like do something much safer, or like, you know, put in a drugstore.
Someone told me that it wasn't going to be the last thing that we did, and that we didn't have to try and get all of our ideas into one building. It was the funniest idea.
100%.
Which is a normal thing to do. Most people don't. It's shocking to me, because the answer to your question is I never had I was born like this. It's wild. And I reflect back, frankly, on like elementary school or high school, and like there was never a moment where I didn't think this was a good idea. You know, most people, they hem and they haw and they say, I don't know, and they think. And that's why most people end up doing more conventional things. I have small kids, right? 8-year-old, 5-year-old, and almost a 1-year-old. My son, who's more like my wife than me, they don't like loud voices. Like if me and David are talking and we're about raucous and right, they said, why are you fighting? I said, well, we're not fighting, we're just kind of yelling at each other. I don't know. And that's like 95% of the population doesn't like conflict. 99% of the population doesn't like conflict, doesn't like sort of loud voices. It's an uncomfortable feeling to have disagreements. And for me personally, like I've just never, upon reflecting back on childhood, been worried about that. Like I always thought it was a fine thing to get up, have a disagreement with someone, a passionate disagreement, and move on and like be friends. And I think that that's the same thing here. Like I never thought for a minute, like, wow, we're really like bucking the trend. We're really doing something different. I was like, it just seems like a good idea. Like, why wouldn't you do it? And everyone's like, well, like no one's done it before. Like, but that was just intrinsic. And I think it's part of the idea of like not worrying about conflict and not worrying about being different. Like it never, I'll finish here. David and I had the running argument that we had for years was, I said, you know, in between the two of us, when people meet us, they think that you're the weird one, right? Look at me. David is recently married, but I said, look at me. I'm normal. You know, I'm married. I have kids. I'm existing in this suburban urban world of LA. Right? And he's like, no, you're like so weird. Like everyone.
Well, I thought it was like the craziest thing ever that like after being partners for so long, he thought like not that like we're all strange. Don't get me like wrong, but like.
But then I was like
literally like Joey, like no one thinks this. Like
right.
You could ask anyone who knows both of us, and they will all say that you're like the more eccentric.
Right. So the answer to the question is,
sure.
When did you have this realization? It's like it just like to me this is totally normal. Like this is a big success. Like it was like of course we were gonna do this. Do you know what I'm saying? Like there was never a doubt in my mind. Just because everyone else did it a different way didn't mean that was the only way it could be done.
Yeah. I mean, I think I like had a different like take on it. I mean, I definitely like, I'm definitely not someone that in general loves conflict, but I like the idea of like, I'm like totally fine being uncomfortable. So like, I don't like choose to like get into situations where like, you know, like getting into it necessarily. But I think that I don't know, I've just always been driven by the idea of like things not necessarily like needing to be the same everywhere. Like traveling since a child, like I was always just super interested in urban planning and like the way that cities grew and the way that neighborhoods evolved. And like I just became like really frustrated like going around to different places and seeing all the same stores and restaurants. And so for me, like a lot of this, with doing like a platform was just like I saw like an issue happening in so many places, and I just truly wanted to create like a solution for people like me that didn't want to go to a city and just find all the same things that they found in every other city around the world. And so when we did platform, it was just like obvious, even though this neighborhood wasn't obvious, that like if we were able to compile like enough interesting businesses, like people would want to come to it and flock to it, because I knew that I was that person. I knew Joey was that person. Like as soon as we were reading about like the new restaurant, some weird up and coming area or the interesting store, like we were in our car and we were over there and we were checking it out. And we're like, okay, like there must be other people like us that want that too. And so, platform was definitely not obvious, but as I said, like in different ways, we both felt it was obvious to do.
And to follow up, it bothers me when things seem like good ideas and no one's doing them. Like it actually bothers me when I look at politics or culture or business, and I'm like, you say like, but you shouldn't do it that way. It doesn't make sense. And they're like, well, that's the way it's done. Nothing gets me going more than that. So the combination, I hate it because it's stupid. It's like we should be doing the things that we should be doing because of the right reasons. And if you can make an intellectual argument for something and prove it, like think it through, you should go do it regardless of whether like it's what people do or not. And I think it's the combination of like the things that we were interested in, plus that sort of slightly rebellious attitude, I would say.
There's definitely a lot of rebellious attitude with us. Like we hate being told, we hate being told what to do by other people. And secondly, like we hate being told that we can't do something. So again, like going back to this retail store, like when we decided to get into the retail business, people were like, this is the dumbest idea we've ever heard. Like you guys are in real estate, stick to real estate. Retail sucks, menswear sucks, don't do it. And we were like, great, we're doing it. So again, I feel like in a lot of ways we are driven by our own passions, but we're also driven by like people thinking we can't do something, especially if we really believe in it. So I don't know what that says about us. But.
Do you guys find, whenever you are rebellious in this way and you do have that change, and I think that people really want change right now, socially, culturally, but then you realize once that change happens that there are consequences or there are effects to that. What would you say, having now created this space, are ways that you could help people mitigate some of the negative effects of change in any space?
It is a very interesting idea. And I'm going to answer it with a slight non-answer, so I'll try and think of a real answer. But the truth is, if you do want to change things, and I do agree, I think that it's like an incredibly exciting time in the world. And I like studying history and understanding what's happened before. I think we're in a very exciting time to be alive culturally. But if you want change, you have to be comfortable that there's no blueprint. That, for example, what we're doing here, there is no one that we can go to and ask, well, you did this and what were the challenges? Like we're blazing a new trail. And I think it's the same, let's just say in culture, as you're changing, you can look to references and try and be smart about it, but like no one's going to tell you what to do. That's like kind of part of the deal, right? Like if you want to be someone who's doing this stuff, who's involved with new ideas, you have to be comfortable that they're new ideas, and there's no one that's going to be able to sort of tell you that. So I wish I had advice for folks that were within their own space that were trying to do this. The only thing that I can think of is like you have to be open to swerving around and to changing course, and certainly to failure. Like it's just not something that concerns me.
I think failure has to be like a big piece of it, because I think that like the second you get to a place where you're so like crippled by this fear of failure and like not doing things perfectly, I think it becomes impossible to really change in an effective way. I think that, for us, again, like the ability to get into something and fail over and over and over again is the only way that we've actually been able to change our businesses, because that's where success comes. Like you're able to pinpoint where you need to like evolve and like how you can do things differently. Again, we've never been like, hey, like we want to just do things status quo and just continue on the same path that everyone else is doing. Like we've always wanted to be like, okay, like I think we've always been believers that like, experience isn't necessarily like the driver of success. Like sometimes having a lack of experience and coming into something with eyes wide open and not having all these like preconceived notions about how something should run, like actually create change in an industry and business, because you're coming in with like a total outsider eye. So
I tell like my son and the kids on his baseball team, they say, oh man, I'm a little nervous to go up to bat or whatever. I said, I'm so jealous of you. Like I'm so jealous of the people who are nervous about doing things, because that's such an incredible feeling. And it's funny, we're trying to put some new stuff together now.
I was just gonna ask.
And I just started feeling it this morning. I had a little bit of a thing in my stomach, like, oh my God, like, what are we doing? Like, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, we're back. You know what I mean? Now,
I'm generally the more anxious of us anyways.
But you gotta have small failures too, right? And you gotta move quickly on them. And you have to acknowledge the things that you didn't do right and fix them slowly. That we're not advocating for big, gigantic flops on your face.
Yeah. Look, like, you got to be smart and be calculated. You can't just be like, throw everything. Like, we make calculated risks, but at the same time, like.
And we have small, fast failures, I would argue, too.
Yeah, we move quickly from them. We don't like sit and dwell and go like, oh my God, we're not going to like get into something else now because this didn't work. Like, it's like, okay, like, what did we learn from this? Like, let's move on.
How do you guys create space in your daily routine to do that? Like, I want to know, like, what do you do on your typical day that allows you like the playground of failure?
That's an excellent question. I don't know.
I'm probably like a worse example of that because like, again, as I said, like I'm inherently an anxious person, but like over the years have really worked to like be able to handle like uncertainty and handle like, just we're in a very high pressure, like anxiety provoking business. Like, we don't have like a set income every year. Like everything is like always like up for grabs. And like, you're always like kind of pushing for your next dollar and figuring that out. So I think for me, I think that it's been longevity of just doing this long enough, like that you see that even though there is that uncertainty, that like in general, like if you work hard and like keep pushing forward, like you'll figure things out. And then just like on a practical basis, I mean, like, exercise, like that to me is like my big thing, is like taking that time every single day to be able to just like kind of like mentally unset and like get some endorphins running. And that like really helps me just like stay balanced. And it's having a great partner. It's like being able to communicate. Like, I think that in general, like I found that over the years, like you'll get more anxious about like certain things and like we'll be like bugging out, and then I'll be like anxious about other. I think you do. I definitely bug out more, but like that, like we're able to like we don't usually like bug out about the same thing. Like usually one of us will be like calm and balanced about something and like really confident, and the other one of us will be like, okay, like now I feel like better because we're able to talk about it. So.
We've gotten much more mellow over the years, I'll say, both of us. We would go through volatile periods at the beginning, not like volatile like most people would say, and never mad at each other, but like, David would be down for a couple weeks, then I'd be down for a couple. We're not, we're much more even. Let me tell you something. When you have a day, or when I have a day, and you wake up in the morning and it's it's 11 o'clock at night, you just came home from dinner and you go to sleep, you're exhausted. I will pop up at 3 a.m. and just be like, what's going on, right? And then I'll lay there for 2 hours and basically like, you guys have done this before, I'm sure. Like the whole, you can't go to sleep, right?
Yeah.
That was this morning.
Was it? I just think it's like, what it shows me is the thing that my answer to that is, I always joke like I don't need a therapist because all I do is talk all day, right? If you're able to process your feelings and thoughts on a real-time basis, a rolling stone gathers no moss. Like the reason that I pop up personally at 2 or 3 in the morning after a long day, like you would think, oh, you're exhausted, but no, you haven't had the time to give yourself time to just think. Like sometimes I look and I see my daughter in her room and she's just like looking at the ceiling. Like she's sitting on the ground looking at the ceiling. And I'm just like, that's me. Like it's that sort of like doing nothing time is so important for yourself, and then being able to talk to someone about how you feel. Like, I've seen so many people in life that are harboring such like feelings inside of them, and they calcify, and then they grow other feelings on top of them. And by the time they finally get out, they're like these weird second and third effect feelings that, like, if you just dealt with the first one, you would have been fine. You know what I mean? So I tend to help in this sort of concept of failure and growth by giving myself time to go on a run or go on a walk or just lay and sit and look at the ceiling for 20 minutes to process, and then also just to talk all the time. Like, just go.
Okay.
Yeah. Because
Yeah,
we each have to find our own way to do that. I think it's extremely important to be able to process and be healthy.
So you strategically plan that out in your day, would you say? Or
I think,
like,
frankly, it's through what David mentioned, which is exercise.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
the only strategic thing I have. Like,
that's where it comes. Yeah. So like a lot of people, they meditate or they have time for like thinking or whatever. It's nothing that planned. And oftentimes it's on the weekend. It's almost like the week everything is so tight and choreographed. And then on the weekend, you just randomly have a thought, or you're on a bike ride or on a run, and the thought, or working out, and the thought comes in. And it's just, it's accepting and allowing for that. But yeah, I mean, there's a Yiddish term called the spilkies. It means you can't stop moving, you know? So I think that,
we
like,
both have cases.
it's just the idea of like meditation or, you know, Joey thinking time probably wouldn't be particularly effective for me. It's the adjunct to moving that gets the brain working for me.
what are you guys both curious about right now? What are things that are piquing your interest at this time?
I mean, yeah, what do you have?
There's so much stuff we're, like,
Please share some.
excited about right now. I mean, I think that certainly, like, we've kind of gotten to this point now where platform just turned 5 years old this year, that we're just excited about the idea of taking this concept to other places. I think for so long we were scrambling to stabilize this asset and to get people excited about what we were doing here and to build this. And I feel like we finally hit this moment where it's operating properly, like people are excited about it, it's just working financially, that we're kind of like, okay, like, we've done this, and not, again, like just resting back and we're like, okay, like, let's just keep going with this. Like, we're like, okay, like, let's keep this moving. So the concept, again, similar to my notion before of just like not liking the idea of replicating, you know, seeing like duplicitous things all over the world. Like, the idea is that as we create platforms in other markets, like, they aren't cookie cutters of each other, that each one has its own architectural language and identity and merchandising, but there's common threads that tie it together that you know, create that similarity. And I think the other things that we're interested in is we've really kind of built this retail business. You know, we have 2 men's stores now. We have a women's store we just opened 3 months ago. We have 3 more concepts opening later this year, is to really grow into some of the premier retail operators in the world and build those businesses not into just stores that exist at platform, but like are really internationally known brands. And so I think that we've been real estate developers, but I really now see ourselves as brand builders. And really, I think my dream is to create an everlasting brand that, like, our kids can, you know, take on. Like, it's just like a generational business.
And I think I'm particularly curious about the intersection of sort of media and commerce, and between physical experiences and digital experiences. The, you know, interesting thing about the past year and a half has been that all these things, I think that, like, we all lived in this very physical world and grew up there, and then the past year and a half we've been living in, like, really a digital world to a large extent. And now we're coming back, and I think people are very excited to be back actually doing real things. But you see, there was a glimpse into what that digital world might look like. And as people who are, you know, really invested in the physical world and think that it's, like, very important to have actual human interactions, you know, how can we build something more broad and all-encompassing that has both physical and digital? Obviously, we have, platform has its website, all the stores sell online. That's like table stakes at this point. But, like, as we expand platform and our customers and our audience, how can we grow that through media, physical, obviously coming to the stores and the places, and then also digitally where it's touching your life, even if you can't come that day, and growing that into something really meaningful. I think that the thing that unites both of our visions also is this idea of like, we have an intern, she's studying sustainability. And I said, what does that mean? Solar things. And she goes, no. It's just building things that can last. And I think that we're both very interested in building things that last, not, building something and selling it to a SPAC. But
we're definitely not interested in just being trendy for the moment.
Or just being hot as an investment idea, but really like building these things properly that can last. And that's on the platform side. And then on this sort of, brand side, how can we do something that's more dimensional than just, the physical space? That's what I've been thinking about a lot.
When you're balancing and creating a space where people come because there are elements that are unique and special, how do you create the foundation of something being timeless with the juxtaposition of something feeling very new and very fresh and very relevant?
I think it's kind of the truth is that all these properties are like truly living and breathing things. Like the idea that like things aren't stagnant, that the idea that things are always moving. And I think that from the very beginning of creating platform, it was like kind of before pop-ups and stuff like that became really popular. And a lot of developers were doing pop-ups really as kind of a band-aid where they were like, we can't lease our space. Like, who can we have just come fill it in and make it look like the property's vibrant? And for us, it was kind of like, no, we actually see these pop-ups as a strategic part of our business model because it allows us to keep the property relevant and fresh. And it gives us the idea that like every few months we can almost like curate the property like a magazine, like an editorial, like what are we interested for spring? What are we interested in for winter? What's the interesting new brand at the moment? And to your point, it's like, again, like there's that combination between keeping something timeless and classic without necessarily like getting like old and stale. And for us, it's kind of having this combination of typical real estate, which is like you have your tenants that are your long-term leases and they're signing these 5 or 10 year deals. And that also you have these tenants that are in for 2 or 3 months that keep things rotating and that, you're keeping things interesting. And so I think that's always been a really unique part of our business model with platform was that we were never afraid to have vacancy. Like for a lot of real estate developers, it was like, you want to just have everything like with credit tenants and long-term leases. And like, you don't like the idea of like having this uncertainty of like who's going to be in your space in the next few months. And for us, it was like, that's the dream. Like we want to continue to like move things around and see what's working and not. And really treat this as kind of this laboratory for the future of retail.
But the piece that keeps it timeless is that there's a perspective. Right. So I think it was a really great question. Like the way that you keep things in line is by staying involved. Like David and I there's no partners. There's no financial partners trying to say, well, you got to do this. It's like, it's us. And we've built an organization now that, which is much more than us. It's the Runyon, team and their perspective, but it's a shared vision of independent retail and really interesting and bringing interesting businesses, chefs, and retailers in. That's the perspective. And then that's how you keep it timeless. And then it's fresh because you're open to switching it up. And it's funny, I'm like, it's the same thing that we talked about in business. It's a comfort in being uncomfortable. The idea that like, I would always tell my wife, like it was 4 years ago, I was like, in June, platform's just going to be running. It's going to be all good. We just have to get,
there's always this hump that you had to like get to. If we just make it here.
Yes, 100%. Like it was the guys in the Andes who were lost in the plane and they like, all they had to do was hike up to that thing and then they'd be over. And they get up and they're almost at the top and they get to the top and they're like, thank God we're free. And they look and there's like 20 more mountains. After a certain point, you just say like, that's okay.
Unless we like think we figured out we liked it. We're like,
yeah, that's that nervousness thing.
Yeah, we're like, we don't want to get to that point where we're just like coasting.
That was an incredible. That's a very sharp point. That was an incredible realization when you realize that like you always think you want to go somewhere in life, right? If I could just get there, I'll be happy. It's like, the second you realize that that's all ridiculous and that it's sort of the journey itself that you're after, this is like very Phil Jackson-y. You're a Lakers fan if you've been down here. So you get to a point where you're just like, oh, like that's it. Like you're never there. It's the journey. That's the whole thing. I guess people have figured that out before us.
How do both of you find ways to balance both creative and business?
That is always like the constant struggle, because I think, and that's also kind of the beauty of our partnership, is I tend to like get like taken over by the creative side, where I like will deep dive into like all these like crazy ideas, and Joey's plenty creative, don't get me wrong, but like he also will bring it back to business. We'll be like, okay, like that's all great, but like we need to figure out how this is actually going to function and like how we're going to build this. Like, yes, like you want to go crazy on like all the landscaping and all these crazy design things, but like ultimately you have to build something that is sustainable and that like economically makes sense. And so I think it's always like kind of this yin and yang of like pushing and pulling that has really worked. I mean, I remember like one of the first stories like was like when we built Platform, we were getting ready to open. We were probably like a few weeks away, and like our landscaping got installed, and we had probably over the years like value engineered like but it was like the most corporate like landscaping that had ever been like put into the like platform. We were like, this looks horrible, like we can't do it. And I remember like looking in, I was like, this is horrible, like we have to rip it out. And Joey's like, no, we just spent all this money on it and did all this, and like was like, we like are barely like doing this. And like I kept like pushing and pushing and pushing, and finally like he capitulated like begrudgingly. And we like ripped out all the landscaping right before like Platform did, and we did it, and now it's like kind of this incredible thing.
Yeah, it's the signature.
And it's the signature of the property. And there's so many other examples of things that like I went crazy with that Joey was like pulled me back, and like were really strong decision. But again, I think it's this balance of never being afraid to like let that creative side lead, but knowing that ultimately you can't be an art project. This can't be something that like is so beautiful and like there's all these like really avant-garde interesting things, but that it's not commercial, that it doesn't financially make sense, because we're not some rich billionaires that can just afford to like have this as like
one day.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully. But that's the truth, is like ultimately the decisions we make need to be kind of really kind of this calculated thing between like how do we make something that's beautiful and nice, but how do we do it in a way that's cost effective and balances with the business plan.
And it's not just this like sort of David would be creative and I would be commercial, or I would be creative and David would be commercial. Within each of us, some of the best business insights I've gotten are from David, who would be like, I guess if people met us off the street, they'd say he would be the more creative one and I'd be the more commercial one. And I think that some creative ideas that we've had have come from me. So it's a partnership issue where one needs to balance the other, but also internally being able to have both switches. Because if you just have one switch and the other partner has the other switch, you're going to be in conflict all the time. But it's, they say the light in me sees the light in you. Like we each have the little bit of light.
I have a practical side too.
He has a practical side and I have a creative side. So being able to see the argument, I think existing within the partnership in that way, but also within each person, allows that balance to be achieved. And again, it's just through talking. Through talking and talking and talking, you find a solution. And once, I'll tell you, the last piece is, that doesn't have to do with the question, is once we find an answer, we go. There's no hooing and hawing. And it was like, we were lost in the south of France, my wife and I, before, iPhones worked around the world. And we had a map and we were like, I think I'm here. And I'm like, I think we should take this road. And my wife, we were like probably 18 at the time. She was like, I don't know. She's like, we can go on that road, but I don't know if we should go on it. And I said, listen to me. I said, from now, forever, here's how we do things. When we make a decision, that's it. We're together. That's it. We can go this way or this way, but we're doing it together. And
there's no blaming.
There's no blaming.
Yeah.
Like, we went down the wrong road. You told me to go down there. Like, no.
We've done that too in our partnership.
We go together.
Like, we make mistakes, or one of us let us down, like, quote unquote.
Whatever.
No, that's what I'm saying, is we never like come back to each other and we're like, oh, like this was your idea.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, okay, we made this decision together and like that's it.
Yeah. So that was an unrelated question, but I felt it was important.
Well, we're excited for everything that you guys are building, and we'll be back, I'm sure.
This is amazing.
Yeah.
What a beautiful operation you guys have here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Yeah,
interviewing
it was
us.
like no brainer. That's one
fun.
thing I didn't have to think about. We came in and said, go.
Seems like therapy.
See, yeah.
I know. That was
Thank you
wonderful.
guys so
Thank you.
much.
I was-